Now for a segment we call Military Minutes. Every other Tuesday, we focus on efforts to support our military in the Bay Area.
And today we're talking about deployment. So joining us now is Technical Sergeant Adam Borgman and Dr. Carrie Elk from the Elk Institute. And thank you guys for being here, and thank you for your service.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for the support.
So deployment doesn't necessarily have to be overseas, right?
Not in all cases. No, there are deployments that are overseas, but there's also some here stateside.
All right.
And so when we know that a neighbor has been deployed, what can we do as a neighbor to help that family?
You know, there are so many things to think about when we think about supporting that way, because we've got single service members and there are unique challenges and ways to support. Well, if you're a single service member and you're being deployed and you have a pet, for example, or you've got plants or a house, you might offer to take care of those things, or start the car every so often to make sure the battery doesn't go dead or whatever it is, and check on things. So that's something to consider. And then if you've got families, you know, you've got a family, and when you've been deployed, what were some of the helpful things that people could do?
Well, you know, I spent a year on a remote tour in South Korea back in 2013, and you know, I had a lot of support from our family, from my family here in Tampa while I was at the time leaving from Herbert Field. So we had a lot of neighbors, a lot of family members within us, but more importantly, supervisors and people that we knew were able to come in and take off some of that workload, some of the concerns of my 5-month-old daughter at the time. So there's a lot of support that's there. The biggest thing is people asking questions. What do we need? What did my wife at the time need to make her life just a little bit easier with a 5-month-old baby, as well as a house to hold?
Yeah, that had to be it had to be really important to you, because I would imagine you're the father, you're away, and that in itself has to be so incredibly difficult. We see that when we do all these reunion stories with the family.
It can be, but the support from the community is really what helps us be able to do our job with a free mind.
And then for those who are listening now, I mean, when we think of deployment, we all think, going into war, but there's a lot of reasons and places where people can be deployed.
You know, one of the things that we think of is here in Florida, we know about the hurricanes,
Yes.
and we have service members that are deployed from all different places to come and do the rescues and things like that during the hurricanes. Those are kind of tours that they have, or missions that they have, that are shorter, days, weeks, things like that. But most deployments are 6 to 12 months is a good way to think about it. They can be longer, they can be extended, but things like that, those rescue missions, and you probably have more examples of other besides combat.
Of course, yeah. As you mentioned, they can be short-term trips, but they can also be long-term. For example, with Hurricane Maria last year, I got on a plane with a couple hours notice, and we went to St. Croix to extract patients and bring them on with the 45th Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron stationed here at MacDill, and we were bringing patients from St. Croix to the stateside to hospitals that could handle and be able to make sure they were taken care of. And that was all of 24 hours in route and back.
And you just mentioned that this was a quick alert that you had to be deployed. Is that always the case, or just sometimes well in advance?
No, that's a great point. It's not. Sometimes months in advance, and that's what Dr. Elk and I were speaking of in the back room was getting prepared for that. And Dr. Elk, you can speak a little bit on that.
Yeah, so as a civilian, I like to share these things, because as a civilian, I think deployment, well, that's when a service member goes overseas for an amount of time, they come home, and that's the deployment, and that's done. But what I learned over the past 10 years working with the military is it starts way before that, this what they call spin up, or the training that they do before to prepare for the deployment. Not only the training might have the service member physically not at home, but mentally not at home, because they're focused on all of that. In addition to the training for the deployment, they have to get all of their affairs in order, legally, and childcare and parenting plans and all kinds of things. So there's a lot of work starting beforehand. There's actually a deployment cycle that you can look at, and they're always in some stage of the deployment cycle. So there's the pre-deployment training and all of the arranging, there's the time that they actually deploy, there's the time that they come home, and there's the reintegration. And if you want to learn more about the deployment cycle and all of that, you can go to military.com and look up deployment, and it describes all that and how it might differ between branches and reserve and active.
And bottom line, look out for your neighbors, however they need help, right? Yes.
Cook dinner, carpool the kids.
Thank you both. It was so enlightening. We really appreciate it. All right, we are here to help you make today great.
And we'll be right back.